Fate has strange ways of revealing itself. For Maria Ebbons, it started like any ordinary morning, a rushed coffee order, a crowd of impatient strangers, and a clumsy collision she wished she could undo. But the man she bumped into wasn't just another face in the city. Jack Fisher was the kind of man people whispered about, the kind of man who didn't forgive mistakes easily. Maria didn't know it yet, but that single, reckless moment would tie her fate to his in ways she never could have predicted. In a city built on ambition and power, she had just collided with the one man she should have feared most. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Maria balanced her phone between her shoulder and ear, desperately trying to juggle her tote bag, her oversized coat, and the flimsy paper coffee tray threatening to tip over at any second. "Yes, Mrs. Lowell, I'm picking it up now," she said hurriedly. The woman on the other end was already barking out instructions for her first day at Whitmore Technologies, as if Maria wasn't already drowning in nerves. She tightened her grip on the coffee tray. 3 lattes, 1 espresso, 2 teas, because apparently caffeine was a universal currency in every office, and she was about to enter a war zone. Maria shuffled forward in the endless line at Brew and Bean, the only halfway decent cafe within walking distance. The place smelled like roasted beans and desperation, perfectly matching the mood of everyone in line, including her own. Her phone slipped a little. She caught it just in time, but not without jostling the tray and sending a slosh of hot coffee dangerously close to the edge. "Can this day get any worse?" she muttered under her breath. And because the universe has a sick sense of humor, that's exactly when it happened. Someone behind her nudged her shoulder hard. She stumbled forward, the coffee tray tilting, and in one horrifying, slow-motion second, the inevitable unfolded. Hot coffee splashed across the impeccably tailored suit of the man standing in front of her. A man who turned around with the slow, deliberate fury of someone who had never been told no in his life. Maria gasped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Someone pushed me." The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked criminally good even dampened by coffee, glared at her with a look that could have turned a volcano to ice. He grabbed a handful of napkins from the counter and dabbed at the front of his suit, his jaw tightening. "You realize," he said in a voice that was low, calm, and somehow far more terrifying than shouting, "this is Italian wool." Maria's brain stalled. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I swear. I didn't mean to." He cut her off with a single raised hand. "I don't need your money." Maria bristled at the way he said it. Like she was some street urchin he couldn't be bothered with. "Well, excuse me for existing," she snapped before she could stop herself. "Maybe if you weren't standing there like a statue, people wouldn't bump into you." The man blinked, momentarily stunned, and Maria took that opportunity to flee, coffee tray wobbling, cheeks burning. She barreled out of Brew and Bean without looking back, heart pounding. "Great, Maria," she muttered to herself. "Way to start your big, impressive career by assaulting a customer with coffee." By the time she reached the towering glass building that housed Whitmore Technologies, she had almost convinced herself that it was over. The man was probably some rich executive who would never cross paths with her again. No harm, no foul. She straightened her coat, fixed her hair in the building's reflective glass, and marched inside. The receptionist smiled at her with the bright, polished enthusiasm of someone legally required to be pleasant. "Welcome. Are you here for onboarding?" Maria nodded, trying to suppress her panic. "Maria Ebbons," she said. "First day." The receptionist checked something on her computer, then handed Maria a visitor's badge. "Elevator to the 25th floor. Mr. Fisher will meet you there." Maria smiled awkwardly and stepped into the elevator, adjusting the coffee tray again. Her hands were shaking slightly, and not just from the weight. Mr. Fisher. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Probably just another suit. She tried to shake off the lingering anxiety from the coffee shop incident. First impressions were important, but she had rehearsed for this. She could handle it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Maria stepped into a sleek, modern lobby. Frosted glass, dark wood, minimalist furniture, the kind of place where you immediately felt underdressed no matter what you wore. Before she could gather her courage, a set of doors swung open, and there he was, the man from the coffee shop, still slightly damp, still radiating silent fury, and very clearly, very unmistakably, Mr. Jack Fisher. Maria froze, her brain short-circuiting. Jack's eyes locked onto hers. Recognition flickered, followed quickly by a look that could have melted steel beams. "Oh no," Maria whispered. Jack crossed his arms. "You," he said, voice cool enough to chill the room. "You're the one who's late." Maria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She had just spilled coffee all over her new boss. Welcome to the worst first day in history. Maria wanted to disappear. No, scratch that, she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole elevator and all. Instead, she stood there frozen, balancing a wobbling coffee tray like it was the last shield between her and public execution. Jack Fisher, because now she couldn't unknow his name, stared her down with the calm detachment of a man mentally blacklisting her from existence. "You're late," he repeated, each word slow and sharp. "And you're dripping coffee," Maria blurted without thinking. Silence. A few heads from nearby offices peeked around glass partitions to watch the unfolding disaster. Jack's jaw flexed. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. He exhaled through his nose, the kind of long, controlled breath that said, "I'm 2 seconds away from committing a crime." "Follow me," he said curtly, spinning on his heel and marching down the hallway. Maria scrambled after him, her tote bag bumping awkwardly against her side, her face burning. Way to make a first impression, Ebbons. Jack's office was exactly what she expected from someone with a perpetual scowl and a wardrobe seemingly sponsored by high-end tailors, sleek, immaculate, and terrifyingly organized. He gestured to a chair in front of his desk without looking at her. Maria lowered the coffee tray carefully onto the side table, her hands trembling slightly, and perched on the edge of the chair. Jack sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, regarding her like a particularly disappointing project. "You're the new administrative assistant assigned to my department," he said flatly. "Yes, sir," Maria said, automatically slipping into professional mode. He raised an eyebrow at her overly formal tone but didn't comment. "I run a tight schedule. Precision is non-negotiable," he continued. "That includes being on time, being organized, and, ideally, not committing acts of violence against upper management." Maria opened her mouth to defend herself, but he held up a hand. "I'm aware accidents happen," he said, voice dry enough to dehydrate a cactus. "But given that this particular accident was memorable, you're already on thin ice." Maria bit the inside of her cheek to stop herself from arguing. Thin ice? She hadn't even had time to lace up her skates yet. "You'll assist with scheduling, communication, project tracking, and ensuring I don't have to waste time dealing with minor inconveniences," Jack continued, flipping through a digital tablet with brisk, efficient movements. "In return, you'll learn how this company operates from the inside." Maria nodded stiffly. "And for the love of all things good," he added without looking up, "stay away from my coffee." There was the ghost of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Maria blinked. Was he teasing her? Impossible. The man looked like he hadn't smiled since the financial crisis of 2008. "Understood," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched to be convincing. Jack tapped something on his tablet, then finally met her eyes again. "You start today. No warm-ups. No training wheels. Sink or swim, Miss Ebbons." Maria clenched her fists in her lap. "I'm a good swimmer," she said before she could stop herself. Jack paused, clearly not expecting an answer. For a fleeting second, something like amusement flickered in his expression. Then it was gone. "Prove it," he said simply. The rest of the day was a blur of chaos disguised as order. Jack Fisher didn't run a department, he ran an empire. Every 15 minutes, there was a meeting, a call, a crisis that needed immediate resolution. Maria barely had time to breathe. Her phone buzzed nonstop with new calendar invites, project updates, client demands. At one point, she was fairly certain she answered an email in Swahili. Jack barked orders like a general preparing for battle, and Maria scrambled to keep up, furiously typing notes, scheduling meetings, and dodging the occasional icy glare when she hesitated a second too long. It was exhausting. It was overwhelming. And somehow it was exhilarating. Maria realized somewhere around the third hour that she hadn't thought about her disastrous first impression for almost 20 minutes. Small victories. By the time the clock hit 6, she was ready to crawl into a corner and cry. She gathered her things quickly, glancing toward Jack's office. He was still there, of course, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched low on his nose as he pored over some dense document. Maria hesitated. She could just leave. No one would blame her. Technically, her hours were over. But something in her gut, a mix of pride and sheer stubbornness, kept her rooted to the spot. She squared her shoulders, marched up to his office door, and knocked lightly. Jack looked up, clearly surprised. "I finished the briefing documents you flagged," she said, holding up a neatly organized folder. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Most people don't survive their first day," he said. Maria offered a tight smile. "I'm not most people." Jack's mouth quirked up at the corner. The tiniest, almost imperceptible smile. "Apparently not." Maria left the folder on his desk and turned to leave, her heart hammering in her chest for reasons she didn't fully understand. As she pushed open the door, she heard him murmur under his breath, "Maybe this won't be so boring after all." Maria smiled to herself as she walked down the hallway, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Maybe, just maybe, she hadn't completely ruined everything. Yet, the next morning, Maria arrived at the office 30 minutes early, armed with a fresh latte in one hand and a stack of meticulously prepared documents in the other. There was no way she was giving Jack Fisher another reason to look at her like she was a walking disaster. The receptionist offered her a small, sympathetic smile as she passed by. Maria offered one back, wondering if the poor woman had seen dozens of hopefuls come and go under Jack's reign of terror. When Maria reached her desk, now officially hers, she took a deep breath, organized everything just so, and reviewed her checklist like a soldier preparing for battle. Coffee? Check. Agenda for the day? Check. Emergency exit plan if Jack tried to kill her with a glare? Check. At precisely 8 a.m., Jack emerged from the elevator, phone pressed to his ear, already mid-conversation about quarterly projections. He didn't acknowledge her. Not even a glance. Maria stared after him for a moment, irrationally annoyed. Fine. She didn't need his approval. She could be professional and detached. Totally detached. Utterly immune to the ridiculous way he managed to look like a cologne ad even while scowling at spreadsheets. Maria shook her head hard. Focus, Ebbons. But staying detached proved harder than she thought. Because 5 minutes later, Jack barked her name from his office like he was summoning a misbehaving dog. Miss Ebbons, I need the Fraser file, he said the moment she stepped inside, without even glancing up from his laptop. Maria inhaled slowly. It's on your desk, she said sweetly. Top right corner. Organized by priority. Jack paused, glanced to the right, and found the exact folder he hadn't noticed. For a brief second, he looked almost sheepish. Almost? Good, he said simply, recovering fast. Keep it that way. Maria suppressed a smirk. Small victories. She turned to leave, but Jack's voice stopped her. And next time, he added, don't sneak around like a ninja. Maria blinked. I wasn't sneaking. I was working. He looked up at her then, his dark eyes glittering with amusement. You move like you're trying not to wake a sleeping bear. Maria crossed her arms. Maybe I am. Jack raised an eyebrow. You think I'm a bear? She shrugged. The metaphor fits. Big, intimidating, easily provoked. To her surprise, Jack chuckled. A low, rich sound that seemed to vibrate through the air between them. Maria stared at him, momentarily disarmed. He had a nice laugh. Infuriating, but nice. You're not wrong, he said, returning to his laptop. But next time, just talk. I'm not going to bite. Maria snorted before she could stop herself. I find that hard to believe. Jack smirked without looking up. Only on Fridays. Maria rolled her eyes and left before she could say something that would get her fired, or worse, make her blush. By noon, Maria felt like she was finally hitting her stride. She managed Jack's calendar like a pro, handled incoming emails with ruthless efficiency, and even impressed one of the department heads by fixing a scheduling conflict without being asked. Maybe she was getting the hang of this after all. Then came the staff meeting. A monthly ritual, as Maria quickly learned, where Jack sat at the head of the table and silently judged everyone's performance with the same enthusiasm most people reserved for jury duty. Maria sat toward the back, notebook ready, determined to blend into the wallpaper. No such luck. Jack's gaze found her almost immediately. Miss Ebbons, he said, voice carrying easily across the room. Since you're new, why don't you take point on today's agenda? Maria's stomach dropped. She wasn't even sure she had an agenda beyond survive and don't cry. But she forced a smile, stood up, and moved to the front of the room. You can do this, she chanted internally. She cleared her throat and launched into the schedule Mrs. Lowell had handed her that morning, trying not to notice how Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching her with that maddeningly unreadable expression. Maria stumbled once, briefly, but recovered fast. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Not awkward silent. Impressed silent. Jack nodded once, slow and deliberate. Efficient, he said. Clear. Maria exhaled silently in relief. Then Jack added, almost makes up for the coffee incident. A ripple of quiet chuckles ran through the room. Maria smiled tightly, her cheeks heating. She walked back to her seat, resisting the urge to whack him over the head with her notebook. He was insufferable. Arrogant, impossible, and annoyingly magnetic. Later that afternoon, Maria found herself alone in the break room, desperately trying to fix the office's temperamental coffee machine. Of course, the stupid thing would choose today to rebel. She wrestled with the filter, muttering curses under her breath when a shadow fell over her. "You're going to lose that battle," Jack said casually. Maria straightened, almost knocking her forehead against the machine. She turned to find Jack leaning against the counter, arms folded, watching her with clear amusement. "I'm capable," she said defensively. Jack tilted his head. "Never said you weren't. Just that the coffee machine has a personal vendetta against humanity." Maria huffed and yanked the filter out triumphantly. "Victory," she declared. Jack gave a slow clap, clearly mocking her. "You want a medal?" Maria wiped her hands on a napkin. "Maybe just a little respect." Jack's mouth quirked. "Earned." Maria blinked. Was that a compliment? From Jack Fisher? Before she could respond, he pushed off the counter and moved past her, brushing so close that Maria caught a faint whiff of his cologne, something fresh and expensive that made her brain short-circuit for a second. "Good work today, Miss Ebbons," he said over his shoulder, voice low and oddly sincere. Maria stared after him, stunned. Maybe the bear wasn't as unapproachable as he seemed. Or maybe she was just losing her mind. Both felt equally likely. 2 days later, Maria had just started believing she could survive working under Jack Fisher without any additional trauma. She knew how he liked his schedules: tight, aggressive, no wasted time. She knew how he took his coffee black, no sugar, no cream, like his soul. And most importantly, she learned to read the subtle changes in his voice, the slight sharpness when a meeting ran too long, the clipped syllables when someone wasted his time, the rare moments of wry humor when he wasn't paying attention. She was adapting. Or so she thought. Because at precisely 9:05 a.m. on Friday morning, Jack strode out of his office with a look that could have frozen lava. "Maria," he said sharply. Her stomach dropped. That tone didn't bode well. "Yes," she asked, pushing back from her desk. "Conference room B. Now." Without waiting for a response, he turned and marched down the hall. Maria scrambled to grab her notepad and followed him at a near run. Inside Conference Room B, a group of executives were already assembled, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Jack remained standing. "Change of plans," he announced, voice brisk. "The Parker project deadline has been moved up. We have 72 hours to deliver a complete presentation to the board." Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. Maria quickly scanned the agenda. The Parker project had been scheduled for 2 months from now. 72 hours? That was suicide. Jack's gaze swept the room like a storm cloud gathering power. "I don't care how you do it," he continued. "Cancel plans. Move mountains. Get it done." Someone raised a tentative hand. "But we don't have a completed draft yet." "Then start one," Jack snapped. "Now." Maria jotted furious notes, her pulse hammering in her ears. This was bad. No, this was catastrophic. She was so caught up in the chaos that she barely registered Jack speaking again, this time directly to her. "Maria, you're coordinating the project." The pen slipped from her fingers. "Me," she squeaked. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Problem?" Maria opened her mouth, closed it, and shook her head. "No, sir." Jack nodded once, satisfied. "You'll report directly to me." Of course she would. Because if she was going to crash and burn, it might as well be spectacular. The rest of the day was a frantic blur. Maria assembled the project team, scheduled strategy meetings, set up shared drives, organized deadlines, basically became the unofficial general of a very panicked army. And Jack? He hovered. He didn't bark orders like Maria expected. Instead, he loomed silently in the background, sharp-eyed and omnipresent, stepping in only when absolutely necessary. It was oddly motivating. Maria didn't want to impress him. At least, that's what she told herself. But every time she caught him watching her with that intense, unreadable look, a small, traitorous part of her wanted to prove him wrong. Wanted to prove herself. By late evening, the first full draft of the Parker project proposal was coming together. Maria sat at the head of the long conference table, laptop open, sleeves pushed up, hair falling messily around her face. She didn't even realize Jack was still there until he slid into the seat beside her. "You're doing better than expected," he said, voice low. Maria snorted without looking up. "High praise coming from you." Jack's mouth curved into something dangerously close to a real smile. "I don't give compliments easily." "I'm shocked," she deadpanned. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You surprised me, Maria." She glanced at him sideways. "Why?" "Because I'm not curled up under the table crying." Jack chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Something like that." Maria returned her focus to the document, trying to ignore the fact that Jack Fisher, world's most terrifying boss, was sitting next to her like a perfectly normal human being. It was disorienting. After a long silence, Jack spoke again. "You don't quit easily." It wasn't a question. Maria smiled faintly without looking up. "Neither do you." Their eyes met briefly. The air between them shifted. Something unspoken crackled in the space, something fragile, dangerous, exhilarating. Maria looked away first, cheeks burning. "Focus, Ebbons." Still, a small smile lingered at the corner of her mouth as she turned back to her laptop. Maybe Jack Fisher wasn't the devil after all. Maybe, just maybe, he was human too. Complicated, sharp-edged, infuriating, and human. At midnight, when the last presentation slides were finalized, Maria stretched with a groan and closed her laptop. Jack gathered his papers and stood, offering her a rare nod of approval. "Good work." Maria grinned despite herself. "Don't get used to it," she teased. Jack smirked. "I could say the same to you." They left the building together, the cold night air slapping Maria awake as they stepped onto the sidewalk. For a moment, they just stood there. Two exhausted warriors at the end of a battle. Jack shoved his hands into the pockets of his coat and glanced sideways at her. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. Maria smiled, her breath fogging in the chilly air. "Neither are you." Jack's mouth quirked into a half-smile before he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the city's glittering lights. Maria stood there for a long moment, her heart doing strange, fluttery things she refused to examine too closely. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, this job wasn't going to kill her after all. It might just save her. Or destroy her completely. At this point, it was a toss-up. The invitation had been impossible to ignore. A mandatory attendance memo, complete with an ominous, strongly encouraged in bold font, arrived in Maria's inbox 2 days after the Parker Project madness wrapped up. Annual Whitmore Technologies Winter Gala. Black tie. No exceptions. Maria groaned aloud the moment she opened it. She hated events like this, fancy parties filled with expensive dresses, stiff conversations, and a sea of people pretending to like each other for networking points. She especially hated the thought of navigating it under the watchful eyes of Jack Fisher. By Friday evening, Maria found herself standing outside the opulent entrance of the Lancaster Grand Hotel, feeling completely out of place. The lobby was a glittering sea of chandeliers, velvet ropes, and champagne flutes. Guests in designer gowns and sharp suits milled about, looking like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. Maria tugged at the hem of her borrowed dress, a deep navy blue number her roommate had sworn would make her look sophisticated but approachable. She just felt like she was wearing someone else's life. She adjusted the simple silver necklace she had thrown on at the last minute and took a deep breath. "You survived Jack Fisher's scheduling demands," she muttered to herself. "You can survive a couple of hours of small talk." Squaring her shoulders, Maria walked inside. The first thing she noticed, besides the overwhelming smell of expensive perfume and power, was Jack. He stood near the grand staircase, talking to a group of executives, his posture relaxed but alert. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him so perfectly it had to be custom-made. The sight of him in anything other than his usual office armor made Maria's stomach do a weird little flip she quickly ignored. Jack caught her eye across the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, almost imperceptibly, Jack's mouth quirked into a half-smile. Maria blinked. Was that approval? She didn't have long to dwell on it because a server thrust a glass of champagne into her hand. And suddenly she was swept into a whirl of introductions and fake laughs. The night quickly descended into a blur of awkward conversations and forced politeness. Maria tried to avoid Jack as much as possible, sticking to safe zones near the bar and dessert table. She had just managed to snag a plate of mini eclairs when a familiar voice drawled behind her. Strategic positioning. Impressive. Maria jumped, almost dropping her plate. She turned to find Jack standing a little too close, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "You scared me," she accused, clutching her eclairs like a shield. Jack smirked. "Relax. I'm not here to critique your dessert strategy." Maria narrowed her eyes. "Why do I doubt that?" He chuckled softly. "You look different tonight." Maria blinked. "Different bad or different tolerable?" Jack's smile widened slightly. "Different good." For a moment, they just stood there, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, yet strangely insulated from the rest of the world. Then, mercifully, Maria's manager spotted her and waved her over. She seized the opportunity. "Excuse me," she said quickly, practically fleeing into the crowd. An hour later, after surviving multiple awkward conversations and nearly tripping over a decorative fountain, don't ask, Maria finally escaped to the outdoor terrace for a breath of fresh air. The winter air bit at her bare shoulders, but she didn't care. It was blissfully quiet out here. She leaned against the stone railing, sipping champagne and staring at the city lights. She didn't hear the door open behind her. "You have a talent for disappearing," Jack said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Maria sighed without turning around. "I needed a break before I committed a social crime." Jack chuckled and stepped up beside her. The silence between them stretched, surprisingly comfortable. "You're doing fine," he said eventually. Maria snorted. "I called someone's wife by the wrong name and almost drowned in the punch bowl. I'm the poster child for grace tonight." Jack's lips twitched. "You're real. That's rare here." Maria turned to look at him. He wasn't teasing. He was sincere. And for some inexplicable reason that made her throat tighten. "Why are you really out here?" she asked, needing to break the intensity. Jack shrugged. "Maybe I needed a break too." Maria smiled faintly. "Even the great Jack Fisher needs air? Especially me." They stood there for a moment longer, the cold forgotten. Then Jack glanced sideways at her, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You realize," he said slowly, "there's an unspoken rule about these events." Maria raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" Jack's smile turned almost boyish. "If you sneak out to the terrace, you owe someone a dance." Maria stared at him. "You're making that up." "Am I?" He extended a hand, daring her. Maria hesitated. Common sense screamed no. Her heart? It betrayed her completely. With a reluctant smile, she placed her hand in his. Jack pulled her gently closer, one hand settling at her waist. There was no music, just the distant hum of the city. But somehow it didn't matter. They moved slowly, swaying in time with a rhythm only they could hear. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. Jack's hand was warm, steady, grounding her. "You're not bad at this," he murmured. "You sound surprised," she whispered back. "I'm surprised by a lot of things tonight." Maria looked up at him, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Jack's gaze dropped to her lips. Maria's breath caught. She should step back. She should say something witty and deflect. Instead, she froze. And for one terrifying, thrilling second, Jack started to lean in. The door to the terrace slammed open. Maria jumped back so fast she nearly stumbled. A group of tipsy employees spilled onto the terrace, laughing and chattering. The moment was broken. Jack stepped back, his face unreadable. Maria cleared her throat awkwardly. "I should go check on my boss," she mumbled. Jack's mouth twitched. "You're looking at him." Maria flushed and fled back into the ballroom before she could do something truly mortifying. Like kiss her boss at a corporate gala. She was in so much trouble. And the worst part? She wasn't even sure she minded. The following Monday, Maria entered the office determined to bury whatever strange feelings had been stirred up at the gala. It was a mistake. An accident. A blip on the radar of her otherwise completely professional relationship with Jack Fisher. She would focus. She would keep her head down. And she would absolutely, positively not think about how close they had been under the stars. Or how Jack had almost. Maria shoved the memory aside and powered through her morning emails. Everything would go back to normal. Or so she thought. At exactly 10 a.m. she was summoned to Jack's office. No big deal. Except when she stepped inside, she immediately sensed the tension in the air. Jack sat behind his desk, arms folded, his expression cold and unreadable. Maria's stomach twisted. "Close the door," he said without looking at her. She did, her fingers suddenly clumsy. He didn't speak for a long moment, flipping through a file on his desk with controlled, deliberate movements. Finally, he looked up. "Would you care to explain this?" he asked, sliding the file across the desk. Maria picked it up, confused. It was a client report she had helped prepare last week. A simple status update, nothing special. Until she saw the glaring red pen marks scattered across the page. Her heart sank. I double-checked everything," she said, flipping through the pages frantically. "I don't understand." "You submitted incomplete numbers," Jack said, voice razor-sharp. Maria blinked. "That's impossible. I copied the data directly from outdated reports," Jack interrupted. "You didn't verify the latest updates." Maria's mouth opened, then closed. She felt like she had been punched. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing the words out through the lump in her throat. "I didn't realize." "And that's the problem," Jack said, rising to his feet. "You didn't realize." His words were cold, clinical, slicing through her like knives. "You've been sloppy." Maria recoiled like he had slapped her. Sloppy? After everything? After the 70-hour week she had just pulled together because he demanded it? She straightened, anger bubbling up through the humiliation. "I made one mistake," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I've worked myself to the bone for this company." Jack didn't flinch. "In this job," he said, "one mistake is all it takes to lose everything." Maria stared at him, heart hammering. There was no warmth in his eyes now. No teasing. No almost smiles. Just cold, brutal disappointment. And it hurt far more than she wanted to admit. "I see," she said quietly, setting the file back on his desk. She turned and walked out without another word. The rest of the day was torture. Maria moved like a ghost through the office, mechanically answering emails, organizing schedules, pretending she didn't feel like collapsing into tears every time she saw Jack's door. She knew better than to let one mistake define her. But the way he had spoken to her, like she was disposable, like she didn't matter, it burned, festered. By 5 p.m., she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her coat and bolted from the building, ignoring the curious stares from her coworkers. Outside, the winter air was sharp and cold, but she barely felt it. She just kept walking, block after block, trying to outrun the ache in her chest. Why did it hurt so much? He was her boss. This was just a job. She owed him nothing beyond professionalism. So why did it feel like something inside her had cracked wide open? Meanwhile, Jack sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He stared at the file on his desk, the one he had thrown onto Maria's lap that morning. The guilt gnawed at him, because the truth was the mistake hadn't even been entirely hers. The project data had changed at the last minute. Someone else should have flagged the update. Maria had been following instructions given under impossible time constraints, and yet he had lashed out at her. Why? Because she made him feel things he didn't want to feel. Because standing too close to her on that terrace, seeing the trust and something dangerously close to hope in her eyes, had shaken him in a way he hadn't been prepared for. Jack raked a hand through his hair. He had screwed up. Badly. And he wasn't sure he knew how to fix it. Maria didn't come into the office the next day. A terse email from HR informed Jack that she had taken a personal day. He stared at the message for a long time, a knot tightening in his chest. He wanted to tell himself it was better this way. That distance would make things simpler, safer. But as the hours dragged on and the empty space at her desk remained glaringly obvious, Jack realized something he couldn't ignore. He missed her. Her stubbornness. Her fire. The way she challenged him without even realizing it. Without her, the office felt hollow. And Jack Fisher hated hollow. He rose from his chair and grabbed his coat. He wasn't going to let this end in silence. Not if he could help it. Not if he still had a chance to make it right. Maria was halfway through a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream, curled up on her battered couch in her tiny apartment, when someone knocked on the door. She frowned. No one visited her without warning. Especially not at 8 o'clock at night. Clutching her spoon like a weapon, Maria padded over to the door and peered through the peephole. She froze. Jack Fisher stood on the other side, looking out of place. Gone was the immaculate CEO armor. He wore jeans, a dark sweater, and a leather jacket that made him look dangerously, frustratingly human. Maria's heart stuttered. For a moment, she considered pretending she wasn't home. But some stubborn, angry part of her wouldn't let her. She yanked the door open. Jack's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. An apology, maybe. A regret. He held up a white paper bag. "Peace offering," he said. Maria crossed her arms. "Unless that bag contains a time machine, I'm not interested." Jack's mouth twitched. An almost smile, hesitant, uncertain. "Chocolate croissants," he said. "From that bakery you mentioned during the Parker project." Maria hated that he remembered that tiny detail. Hated that it made her heart ache a little. She stared at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she said. "And then I'm kicking you out." Jack nodded solemnly, stepping inside. Maria shut the door behind him and folded her arms tightly across her chest, creating a barrier between them. Jack handed her the bag without a word. She accepted it reluctantly, setting it on the coffee table without opening it. Silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward. Finally, Jack spoke. I was wrong. Maria blinked. He said it so simply, so quietly that it almost didn't register at first. I should have handled it differently, he continued. The report, the data, it wasn't entirely your fault. The system update wasn't communicated properly. You were working off outdated information. Maria swallowed hard. So you humiliated me for something that wasn't even my mistake? Jack flinched. I was angry, he said. Not at you. At a lot of things. You didn't deserve to be the one I took it out on. Maria stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess of hurt, anger, and reluctant understanding. You have a funny way of showing you care about your employees, she said bitterly. Jack's jaw tightened. I don't care about my employees. Maria's stomach twisted. Of course. She should have known. But, Jack said, stepping closer, I care about you. Maria's breath caught. She hated how much those words affected her. You're not exactly good at it, she said, voice shaking slightly. I know, Jack said, softer now. I'm learning. He hesitated, then added, you make me want to be better. Maria stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. This wasn't the Jack Fisher she knew. This wasn't the cold, unreachable man who barked orders and expected perfection. This was someone real. Someone raw. Someone trying. I don't forgive easily, she said quietly. Jack nodded. I'm not asking you to. Another beat of silence. Maria looked down at the bag of croissants, then back at Jack. You have terrible timing, she said, a reluctant smile tugging at her mouth. Jack's mouth curved into something warmer, realer. I'm aware. Maria sighed, dragging a hand through her hair. I don't know what this is, she said, voice small. Jack stepped closer. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know I don't want it to end before it even begins. Maria looked up at him. Saw the vulnerability there. The hope. And despite everything, despite the anger, the hurt, the fear, something inside her softened. Maybe it wasn't smart. Maybe it was reckless. But for once, Maria decided to follow her heart instead of her head. Slowly, she reached for the bag of croissants. I'll consider accepting your apology, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jack exhaled, a laugh breaking through the tension. And what does that consideration involve? Maria smiled faintly. Starts with you helping me finish this ice cream. Jack grinned, a real, breathtaking smile that lit up his entire face. Deal. He kicked off his shoes and sank onto the couch beside her, accepting a spoonful of mint chocolate chip without hesitation. Maria shook her head in disbelief. Jack Fisher. Eating ice cream on her couch. The world truly had gone mad. But for the first time in a long time, Maria didn't feel lost. She felt right. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. For the next few weeks, something changed between Maria and Jack. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations or sweeping romantic gestures. Instead, it was subtle. A softening of the sharp edges. A lingering glance here. A shared smile there. Quiet conversations that stretched longer than they needed to. At work, they maintained a fragile professionalism, barely. But after hours was theirs. They started meeting for coffee under the pretense of catching up on projects. Long walks through the city turned into dinners that lasted until midnight. Arguments still flared between them. God, did they argue. But now there was laughter threaded through the bickering. An undercurrent of something warm and undeniable. Terrified Maria. And thrilled her. She wasn't naive. She knew Jack Fisher was a man who kept his emotions locked away. Who lived in a world built on control and power. But with her, he let some of those walls crack. And Maria found herself slipping through the cracks before she could stop herself. One night, after a particularly brutal day of back-to-back meetings, Jack texted her. Meet me. 8 p.m. Usual place. No explanation. No details. Just a command. Maria rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her mouth as she grabbed her coat. The usual place turned out to be a tiny rooftop garden Jack had discovered. An oasis above the city noise, strung with fairy lights and surrounded by ivy-covered walls. He was already there when she arrived, leaning against the railing, staring out at the skyline. Maria approached quietly. For a moment, she just watched him. The way the wind ruffled his dark hair, the way his shoulders, usually so tense, seemed lighter. Jack turned, sensing her presence, and smiled. Not the tight, polished smile he used in boardrooms. A real one. Maria's heart squeezed painfully. You called? She teased, stepping closer. Jack chuckled. I needed a distraction. Maria raised an eyebrow. Bad day. Jack shrugged. Long day. Too many people. Too many demands. He paused, then added, voice softer. I just wanted to see you. Maria's breath caught. Simple words. Dangerous words. She shoved her hands into her pockets, fighting the urge to close the distance between them. Well, she said lightly, I'm here. Distract away. Jack stepped closer. So close she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tiredness lurking in his eyes. You already do, he murmured. Maria's throat went dry. This was different. This wasn't teasing. This wasn't flirting. This was raw, unfiltered, and terrifying. She opened her mouth to respond. Something, anything. But Jack lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with a touch so gentle it nearly undid her. Maria, he said, her name rough in his mouth. She shivered. I'm not good at this, he admitted, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. I don't know how to do this without screwing it up. Maria placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart beneath her palm. Me neither, she whispered. They stood there for a moment, suspended between fear and hope. Then Jack dipped his head and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, certain, devastating. Like he was memorizing her. Like he was claiming her. Maria melted against him, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling in an instant. When they finally pulled apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to lose this, he said quietly. You won't, Maria whispered back. They stayed like that for a long time, holding onto each other like lifelines. Above them, the city lights blinked and shimmered. Below, life rushed on, oblivious. But up here, on this rooftop, it was just the two of them. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like the beginning of something real. Something worth fighting for. Something worth risking everything for. 3 months later, Maria stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, smoothing the fabric of her pale blue dress with shaking hands. Tonight was important. No, not important. Pivotal. Jack Fisher had asked her to attend a charity gala with him. Not as his assistant. Not as a colleague. As his partner. Officially. Publicly. Maria's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she adjusted her necklace for the third time. She still wasn't sure how they had gotten here, from spilled coffee to slow dances on rooftops to whispered promises in the quiet hours. It hadn't been easy. There had been fights. Misunderstandings. Doubts. But through it all, Jack had stayed. Steady. Patient. Relentlessly himself. And Maria? She had stayed too, despite every voice in her head warning her not to trust something so fragile. Because somehow, against all odds, they worked. They were messy. Complicated. Imperfect. And real. The knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Maria opened it to find Jack standing there in a tailored black suit that made her brain short-circuit. He held a single white rose in one hand. For you, he said, a small, shy smile tugging at his mouth. Maria accepted it, her throat tightening. You clean up well, she teased, trying to lighten the moment. Jack stepped closer, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. So do you, he said, voice low. They stood there for a beat too long, neither moving. Then Jack cleared his throat. We should go, he said, but he didn't step back. Maria smiled, looping her arm through his. Lead the way, Mr. Fisher. The gala was exactly as horrible as Maria had imagined, too many cameras, too many fake smiles. But with Jack's hand steady on the small of her back, the noise faded into background static. He introduced her to colleagues, investors, even a few board members. And every time he said her name, there was pride in his voice. Not possession. Pride. It melted something deep inside her. Later, as they escaped to the quieter balcony overlooking the glittering city, Maria leaned against the railing, exhaling slowly. Jack joined her, his shoulder brushing hers. You okay? He asked. Maria smiled. Getting there. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights twinkle below. Then Jack turned to her, expression suddenly serious. I've been thinking, he said. Maria arched an eyebrow. Always dangerous. Jack chuckled under his breath. I don't want to do this halfway, he said. I'm tired of pretending I don't care what people think. I'm tired of pretending you're just another person in my life. Maria's heart stopped. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maria gasped. He was. Jack opened the box to reveal a simple, stunning ring. A delicate band with a small, perfect diamond. No fanfare. No spectacle. Just Jack. Honest. Real. I'm not asking for forever, he said quietly. I'm asking for now. For a chance. For whatever this becomes, as long as we choose it. Maria's eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. And then, because words felt too small, she nodded. Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite the faint tremor in his voice. Maria laughed softly through her tears. I thought you said you don't do romantic gestures, she whispered. Jack smiled crookedly. Turns out you're a bad influence. Maria leaned up and kissed him, her hands curling into the lapels of his jacket. Around them, the city buzzed and pulsed with life. But up here it was quiet. It was theirs. When they finally broke apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers, smiling. I'm still not letting you near my coffee machine, he murmured. Maria laughed, the sound pure and bright. Deal, she whispered, because some mistakes were meant to happen. Some collisions were destined. And some love stories like theirs began with a spilled cup of coffee and ended with a kiss under the stars.